blues, America and the blues. Yeah. Yes, the blues. The blues is very dear to my heart because it's the foundation of all the music that I love. You know, from jazz, R&B, what I call sweet soul, like Curtis Mayfield, people like that, funk, and of course rock and roll. All this were the children of the blues, basically. So it kind of, all these branches went in various directions, basically. But I always give credit to those men on the banks of or not the banks, but the Mississippi Delta, rather. And how the music, in all its different forms, has basically mapped out the history of this country, basically. And it's a history that I think I was talking about Donald Trump the other day with somebody, and as ugly as he is, man, and abhorrent, there has been something that his presidency has done. It brought forth the underbelly of this country that's always been there for all to see, and there was just no denying. So this is what's caused this awakening, so-called awakening in the country, and I'm glad it's happening. I'm just saying that it's a long time coming. It's basically awakening to people actually believe in black folks. So I'm glad it's happening, but it could have been a lot sooner, man. But what I'm finding now is that there's just a real gap, and I've known this for a long time, that in schools it's just not. I don't even think I ever saw a picture of a lynching when I was in school at all. That was the education I got on my own later. Even though they're readily available all over the internet and very gruesome. But the reason why I bring that up, as depressing as it is that this is the missing link of our history that most people don't know. They may know the Jim Crow South or whatever and hear that in segregation, but it was the violence that accompanied it that was what made it so horrendous. If it was just segregation, people could have dealt with that. There was actually positive that actually people invested in their own communities a little bit more. But when I always argue with other people that say, well, that was better. No, it wasn't better then, man, because there was a bunch of stuff that propped the system up. It was propped up by violence. And, if you didn't adhere to these rules, there were violent consequences by the Klan or just ordinary people back then. But this is the period that I think gets lost on people. And that if you know the whole history in linear fashion, from slavery to the early 20th century, which, again, man, it was horribly violent, man. We had, and I was telling someone that the main things that are missing is that we had huge, massacres. And they called them riots, but they weren't. They were just basically massacres that were just totally not in the history books at all. And these were major, major events in the 20th century. Tulsa, Oklahoma, man, was the bare minimum was like 300 dead. And they're finding mass graves now in Tulsa. They're just now breaking ground. They found anomalies from the sky. And what survivors said was true is turning out to be true. They're finding mass graves over there. And this was a whole community that was very affluent. And I thought, my father used to tell me stories about Sacramento Street in Berkeley. And so I thought it was something like that, kind of, like maybe working class but nice little shops. And my dad said it was cleaners and this and that. No, it wasn't that at all, man. It was very, very, a wealthy area. There was oil money in Tulsa, new oil money. And that had trickled down into the black community themselves. And they actually built a community that, had theaters. Their church was actually better than the white churches across the tracks. And real estate agents. I mean, just everything, man. It was just all this. It was just really, they really had it together, man. And they called it Black Wall Street. And something happened, as is always the case. People just were looking for a reason. So a black guy used an elevator down in downtown Tulsa and bumped into a white woman in the elevator, and something happened, and then that was all that was needed. And there was a reason. I always point this out, that this was right after World War I, where a lot of returning soldiers caused a big threat. And this was the first time they came home in mass with guns, and been in other parts of the world. So this was a threat, and this is what called, you had the bloody summer of 1919, Tulsa in 1921. You had Rosewood, Florida, which wasn't as affluent, but still a whole community just destroyed in a few days of lynching, flames, and whatever. But what I say is that, oh, and what was the other one? Elaine, Arkansas. That was another one where there was like 300 people. So I'm saying all this stuff has been missing from the history books. So there's just this big gap when people look at the situation now. I mean, if you view everything in linear fashion, I think African Americans, we're kind of where you would think we'd be given the history, from slavery, the Jim Crow lynching era to now. We still have mass incarceration, police brutality, unjust killing still going on. So we still have a lot of work to do. But it stands to reason that there's still these issues. I mean, there's only been like 55 years, as old as I am, since black people have been able to vote in mass, had full rights. But during all this, we just kind of put the laws so they'd be fair on the books, but we've never did any kind of truth and reconciliation where we actually talked through what has happened and just acknowledged it. It was really wrong, and let's try to see what we can do to work it out. We've never done that, and we're trying to get to that. But people just always use these dirty words like reparation and all this stuff like it's some crazy idea. It's not. This is stuff that was promised after slavery and never happened. Can you imagine being 250 years of slavery and then being just released to nothing? You had nothing to start a new life with. And that's what happened. The 40 acres and a mule never happened. In fact, the slave owners got $300 per missing slave. So they got reparations and African Americans didn't. So I'm just saying that to say that we need to really study up a little bit so people have a clear picture in context of where we are now. And I just think that's really missing. And that's been a failure of our education system and just people passing along the history, say a white kid in Contra Costa. I worked with a couple of guys where they asked me they didn't know anything. So it was like, and that's not their fault if they're not being taught in school. So it breeds this ignorance. And I'm not saying ignorance as an insult, but just in the true sense of the word. They just don't know, So I'm trying to, as much as I can, I've actually talked to people online before where I've actually had occasions where there's been like a light bulb moment. So, oh man, I didn't know that. So we've had a really violent history, and to not acknowledge that, I just think we have to be honest about it, not make excuses, no addendums, no buts, all that, man. This was the most horrendous form of slavery, and of all forms of slavery, this was like just the mother lode. It was the slavery to end all slaveries in, civilized or polite society, so to speak. So that, like I said, it was the mother lode, and after that, it still didn't end. We still had, basically, we had two different migrations out of the South, man, and the narrative that is told is not true. It's always about jobs and this and that. That was part of it, but the bigger part was these were actually refugees fleeing terror in two separate waves out of the Deep South. They were fleeing for their safety. So I just hope people take it upon themselves to learn a little bit. So it's a way that we will all be able to come together, united as a more unified country. But people have to take the time to really learn this stuff and not be threatened by it. Just know that this is our history and it's as apple pie as anything else. So, just do your homework and don't forget, we want the blues, but we don't want the reality of the blues, where the blues came from. We don't need that. We can enjoy the music without having to replicate the horror and the oppression of it. So enjoy the music and study up. Philip Hennon, Adventures in Mood City.